Well, let's continue our conversation now about this One Canadian Economy bill. Mia Rabson is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Canadian Presse, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all of you.
Hello there.
Hello.
I like how you leaned over to JD. Like you don't know him. But listen, so here we have a very ambitious bill from this government. And at the same time, not only an ambitious bill, Mark Carney is saying he wants this passed before the House rises for the summer, which, if it's on schedule, is a little more than 2 weeks' time. Does he have the political capital to get this done, Tonda?
Well, you know, he surprised us by winging through a bunch of votes this week, didn't he?
He did that.
Nobody stood up to oppose him. Yeah. So perhaps he does. The thing is that during the last campaign, all parties sort of agreed on the need to move with speed to expedite a whole bunch of resource development projects in the face of the Trump challenge. And so perhaps he does. Notwithstanding the complaints that we have heard and may perhaps hear more of from Indigenous groups, leaders, advocates saying that we haven't had enough time to really consult on this, and that you're failing to meet the standard of getting our free, prior, and informed consent that's enshrined in law. So look, I think that perhaps is going to be one of the big obstacles. Environmental concerns may be another big obstacle to a lot of this, if in fact projects are rushed through reviews. But look, 2 years is what they're calling a fast track, and they're kind of opening a window of 5 years to get a bunch of this stuff through those fast tracks. That's all still, one would think, time to do some of these reviews. So let's see.
Yeah, we'll see. JD, what do you think?
Well, it just shows again the ambitious agenda that Mr. Carney has, and he will need still the collaboration of the other parties. And there's still some stuff to set up. There's no committee yet of the House of Commons that have been set up formally. So that's a part of the business of adopting some legislation. So those needs to be set up, and there's 2 weeks left to go. So some committees may want to hear some witnesses. So it might be difficult to meet that deadline that Mr. Carney is fixing. Still, you see that Mr. Carney is still surfing on the momentum of facing the United States and the tariffs and the threats from the United States to push transformation of the Canadian economy. And for now, I think there's some unanimity around that goal, except, as Tonda mentioned, First Nations want to be part of the equation as well. And Mr. Carney has been clear on that today, but will he be as clear as he pretends to be? Will it satisfy the First Nations? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, it remains to be seen. Although when you talk about unanimity, I'm also just coming back from Saskatoon, there certainly was a lot of support for moving quickly.
Yeah, they were singing Kumbaya out there. But, you know,
and Doug Ford comparing him to Santa Claus.
And then right away ran into the Indigenous concerns.
Yeah. So what do you think about the political capital issue here?
I mean, I think he probably has the political capital to get this through the House of Commons. Sounds like Pierre Poilievre has suggested that Conservatives will support this legislation. Getting it through the House of Commons is only the first step. And that's what I've been hearing from a lot of Indigenous leadership and also environment leaders. You can pass this legislation, but if you still end up in court, does it actually fast track anything? And Indigenous communities in particular are already saying that there's a lot of red flags on this legislation for their free, prior, informed consent requirements and you know, their rights to that. And you know, you want to fast track projects, you're not going to do it if you end up in court. I mean, this is what happened with Stephen Harper and the Conservatives during that government. I mean, a lot of things didn't get built because we were in court, and so that, you know, that does not actually help. So I'm hopeful that the government has that in mind, but they want to move fast. I think it's also notable, to Tonda's point, you know, 2 years and 5 years. That in Canada is actually fast tracking because it takes many more years than that most often to get projects from start to finish. And so, like, it sounds like not a lot, like sounds like a long time, but it is in Canadian terms actually fast tracking.
And I will point out that when you go through the bill, he does mention Indigenous consultation. They also, of course, mentioned it in the throne speech. So what that looks like in practical form is something we're going to have to follow.
It's all about that, isn't it? As we saw from the Justice Minister this week, who didn't really know his file on this, or knew the file, put it forward frankly, and then dialed it back as soon as he faced some criticism. So, you know, I just
saying that it was not an effective veto for Indigenous communities.
It wasn't an effective veto, and in fact, that is the accurate representation of the law. Legally, it's been interpreted that way, as not to accord a blanket veto to communities, to Indigenous groups. However, the courts have also enshrined a very, I guess, meaningful duty to consult and accommodate, and to it puts a lot of onus on project proponents and the government to respect the community's rights, address their interests. And Mark Miller, a former minister on both those files, Indigenous and Crown Relations and Services, explained it very clearly, and also said, you can take a CEO approach to this when you can send in you can send in your government relations people or your lawyers to talk to communities, but you're only going to get a middleman discussion. Yeah. Send in your CEO to respect them and listen to them and actually deal with them. Let's see if Mr. Carney is that kind of a prime minister. Is he prepared to put his capital on the line to get and secure the group's consent?
You could see the influence of Mr. Carney's in this government, obviously because he's the prime minister, but the change of tone. He's putting a lot more emphasis on blue liberals philosophy, business. He wants to recreate business confidence in Canada, investing in projects. We've seen many projects being abandoned in the past because businesses got tired of waiting. Mia was talking about long time period before they got approvals. It could be from 10 to 15 years in some cases. That's too long for businesses to move ahead with projects. And that's what Mr. Carney wants to change. And that, I think, is also part of the strategy. There are projects that will be financed by Ottawa, but he also wants the private sector to get involved.
Private sector money.
Because Ottawa can't finance anything, and that's one of the strategy part of it.
Because it's only catalytic.
I will also point out, however, that some Indigenous leaders were already unhappy with the short period of time they had to even consult on the bill. Like, they were given some details and briefings ahead of time. They only had a day or two to respond, and they didn't think that was enough time. So, Mark Carney wants to move really, really fast, but not necessarily all of the people who have to be consulted want to move as fast as he does.
And can I say, the two examples he also raised was how quickly they came up with Expo 67 and the St. Lawrence Seaway. And all I can think of, well, that was a different time when consultation was not so big on the agenda for government.
And environmental. It was prior to the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution, which has constitutionalized treaty rights and land claims and rights to be consulted. So Mr. Carney can look back to those old projects, but we're in a different world, and you can't necessarily run government the way you run business.
And also, the environment was an afterthought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Listen, I got to move on. I only have about 4 minutes here, but I want to pick up on the other part of the bill, because moving projects quicker is one part. The other part has to do with internal trade, and what was announced today is essentially dropping the federal barriers to internal trade. This is not the grand deal between the provinces and the territories. How significant or insignificant is this move, Tonda?
Well, it's not really clear to me. I mean, I guess that there are some provisions, federal regulations around internal trade that relate to national security. Perhaps that will remain. I'm not clear even what those are. Honestly, I don't really know what they've done and what's left to do. As of really 2017, they've been talking about, since they struck an Internal Free Trade Act in Canada, of doing this. Last year, they set in motion a consultative process, and Anita Anand at that time apparently knocked down a bunch of barriers, and in March they did the same. So what's left and what really is being brought to bear here? That's not clear to me, but I think the biggest barriers are things like the interprovincial, say trucking regulations, or regulations on certifying who's a practicing nurse or dentist in this province or that province. Like that's the nuts and bolts. Just like the projects part of that bill and the trade barriers part, it all comes down to what are the details, what are, the rubber hits the road on what projects they're going to accelerate, and it hits the road on what barriers they're dropping, and that's not really clear.
Well, it is clear that most of the heavy work has to be done by the provinces because they instituted those barriers between themselves. And the federal government, it's more, not symbolic, but it's maybe 15% of the barriers are from Ottawa. And they want to show leadership by saying, we're going to do it. Please follow the example. And most provinces, well, I think 7 out of 10 provinces now have reached deals to try to eliminate those problems. So
not everything, though.
Not everything. No,
Quebec doesn't drop its construction regulations.
That's true,
Newfoundland hasn't dropped its fish processing regulations.
But most of it, I think, it's going to be an improved situation par rapport à what we have right now.
Yeah, but no, sorry, I'll let you say.
I mean, all I was going to add to that is that I think that what a lot of Canadians were hearing every time Mark Carney said that they would do this by July 1st is that they would all be gone by July 1st. They were not actually hearing the word federal. He was always clear it was federal, but I don't think most Canadians really were, they were hearing, oh, everything done by July 1st, and that is just not going to happen.
They heard one Canadian economy, not 13.
There is progress absolutely between the provinces, but to Tonda's point, like it's not going, no province is going to drop everything because provincial jurisdiction is still, king in this country.
Well, but what's interesting is that, again, this is not the grand deal. And if Mark Carney was talking solely about the federal regulations, which you say he was, when they talk about the potential that internal trade unleashes, they're not just talking about the federal component of that. They're talking about all components of internal trade.
This bill is not going to unleash that internal economy because most of those big barriers are between the provinces.
And I guess also a question for me, and just quick go around here. How important is it that Ottawa is willing to surrender its portion of reviews to the provincial portion? Is that symbolic enough to get people to come to the table with more?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about their objective of applying one project review to big projects, I think also the devil is in the details on that. If you have, for example, the designation of a project like a Western Energy Corridor, where those provinces are likely to be able to land on agreement that one review may be done by the feds or one review may be done by Alberta, can be the referee of all the disputes for that particular portion. But as soon as you get it going across, say, provinces that aren't necessarily in line, perhaps Ontario, Quebec, with whatever pipeline might come forward as a result of these proposals, I think then it's going to be really tricky to get agreement on who gets to decide, who gets to be the referee.
30 seconds.
In Quebec, that proposal is a winner. François Legault loves that proposal because there's an institution called the BAP, le Bureau des Évaluations Environnementales, and it's very, very strict and very, very done a lot of studies in the past that were very well received. So if that supersedes the federal government, Quebec will be very happy.
They'll love it.
Okay. Yep. Quick last word to you, Mia.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when those provincial reviews don't necessarily go as far as the federal government would want or would be demanded of in terms of environmental risks and things like that. I mean, does the Alberta review or the Manitoba review actually look at the Species at Risk Act or the Fisheries Act at the level that federal law actually requires? And if it doesn't do that, even if this legislation allows them to go around that, they're going to be challenged in the court.
Okay. Well, as I say, a major piece of legislation. We're watching it go through. We'll see if it catalyzes more actions here in Ottawa. Tonda, JD, Mia, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.